Hello, and welcome to today's fourth podcast in a series sponsored by Hope House. Hope House is a nonprofit entity in Barrington, located in Barrington, Illinois, where we're attempting to address the suicide situation and other problems affecting our elders, veterans, and teenagers. Someone called this week and asked, what does Hope House acronym stand for? And thank you for asking that. But number one, it stands for Help Open People's Eyes. We want people to realize that the scourge of suicide and depression and loneliness is really eating away at the fiber of our reality of who we are as people. And number two, help other people eat. We've partnered with Conscious Alliance out of Boulder, Colorado. Their CEO is Justin Levy, a former Barrington student, who is responsible for feeding over 2 million meals to the Pine Ridge and Rosebud Indian Reservation, as well as food throughout the year, concerts, and art that feeds. So thank you, Justin, and I will turn it over to today's top speaker, Dr. Mike Swanwick.
Hello, Ray. Thank you for that. That's a good way to start off with letting people know what HOPE stands for, because the acronym is the acronym. However, what I want to talk about today, or leading into what I want to talk about today, is a recap of the first three podcasts, because I was watching them and thoughts were popping into my head about what we should say or what we should have said or what we could say. And I specifically remember asking myself how hypervigilance and trauma and any other symptomatic affective trauma, how they interrelate. And when I was talking about them, I didn't think they related or were related to one another, and they are. And so I'm just going to keep going with that. I think that, for example, when we talked about memory and how your memories can be distorted by trauma. And I thought about, years ago, I said I had no memories of my father, none, zero. And so someone told me to go to a lake, go to a quiet place that I knew where I wouldn't be disturbed and just sit there. And so after having no memories of my father prior to that, I had 4 pages. And they were just occasions in my head that popped up. And one of them was that I was a little kid and I saw my father go into the garage. So I chased him to the garage, and he turned around right before he got into where he did what he did. And he told me to go home and get out of here. And that memory or that dream to me was very, very, very real. And so I talked to somebody in my family about that situation, and they said that didn't happen, that it was a dream. It was part of the guilt I carried about not being able to stop what he was doing. But to me, that was a perfect example of how memories can distort reality based on trauma. So that part fit right in. And it's really funny how this happens and how it does distort family memories. And the other thing I remember distinctly about prior to some work I've done around my father's death was every time I looked straight ahead, I could never see him. He was always off to my right or off to my left, just out of my peripheral vision. I could sense he was there, but I could never see him. And I would hear his voice once in a while. But finally, after some work I had done around that situation, he was standing right in front of me. And then I've had some wonderful people tell me that he's reached out across the universe to tell me he's proud of me and that he's okay, which is wonderful. But I was just really thinking about that whole memory thing, about how it gets ingrained in your head. And when you think it's real, there's nobody going to talk you out of it. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was when I talk. I really am not pontificating. I'm not talking from the mountaintop that I know everything there is to know about trauma, grief. I'm right there with everybody. And in terms of age groups, maybe that's why I feel like I'm 10 years old when I talk about this, because it's like I am. And I don't want to ever give that impression that I know everything, because I don't. What my object here when I wrote my dissertation, when I do this, is to use my experience, share my experience with other people so that they can learn from it and maybe it'll help them. That's my goal. And so that's the other thing I wanted to talk about briefly, which I just did. So it's amazing. This work has opened my eyes, especially since I met Ray. I was talking to Ray before we got here, and I needed someone to give me a push and give me the confidence I needed to have to do this work, and he helped me with that. So I'm forever indebted to Ray and his wife for just the positive energy and everything we're doing around this podcast. And there's so much great energy. It's wonderful. And which is also the third thing I wanted to talk about before I really start talking about stuff is living in the moment. And I had a real hard time staying in the moment. And when I started to learn about living in the moment, if I went on Facebook, I would see posts like we're halfway to Christmas. It's half St. Patrick's Day. The NFL draft is in 284 days. We're never taught to stay in the moment. And I don't understand. I know for marketing purposes, that's why you have to advertise Black Thursday or Black Friday in July, because you got to get ready. And if you watch TV, I'm semi-retired, so I'll watch TV during the day, and I see a lot of commercials about IRAs, savings accounts. And for the longest time, I was a paycheck to paycheck guy. I had none of it. And all that did was make me nervous about, what's going to happen when I die. I got nothing. And then I started laughing because the people who do have something sometimes, you can't take it with you. So I don't worry about that anymore. And staying in the moment to me is very, 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 I have to do that with this. I have to think about, okay, I'm present here now, because if I start going all over the place with my brain, that's when things don't work out. And I'm learning. It took a long time for me to learn how to stay in the moment, and just here I am now, and that's all that matters. And the other thing I thought about before I start, I saw a singer. His name is Jeff Tweedy, and he's the front man for a world famous band called Wilco. And he does this benefit every year for a school that his sons went to. I think that's who the benefit is for. But he just comes out on stage by himself without his band with a guitar and sits there and talks about, he tells stories. He could be a stand-up comedian. He tells stories about songs. He tells stories about his wife, his life, etc. And then he started talking about, when I'm on stage like this, I hear the good Jeff and the bad Jeff in my head. And when I do this, I hear the good Mike and the bad Mike in my head. That, what do you think you're doing? You're not supposed to be doing this. You're not good enough to do this. And that's another thing of staying in the moment. You have to tell that bad Mike to go away and let the good angel come and talk to you and guide you through moments like this, because that's where the best energy comes from. So given that, and the last thing was, I heard the idiom, the adage, I came from the school of hard knocks. People say that if you ask them if you go to college. Well, I came from the school of hard knocks. I don't even know what that means. And the other university that I never attended was the University of Uganda. And I would talk to certain people about my problems, about how I was feeling. And they would say, well, you got to do this and you got to do that. And that did not help me at all. And so if I broke up with my girlfriend, you got to get a new one. If I got a D in a class, well, you got to do better. Really? So I just, those make me laugh, and they still resonate in my head because I heard the you gotta thing so many times. And it doesn't do any good. And with that, I wanted to, before we get into the types of grief, I wanted to talk about triggers and what they are. And triggers are psychological responses to trauma. And they can remind us of that traumatic event. and I didn't know what a trigger was. And all of a sudden, I'd be driving in my car, and I felt like someone was in the back seat flicking my ear with their finger, and I didn't know why. And part of that came with Ray. Him and I would talk about it. I go, what are triggers? And why all of a sudden do I think something's going to happen to me when all I'm doing is driving my car? So after doing some research on triggers, they're psychological responses to trauma. For example, my trigger, I'd never watch Moby Dick again till I think 2 years ago, because that's the movie I was watching when they told me my father died. So, okay, that's an easy one. And the other trigger is secrets. So my sisters told me that when we went to my grandfather's house after my dad died, I didn't know that they told me he was sick, so I didn't know he's dead. All my cousins knew what happened except me, and my sisters knew as well. And so you're looking around the house, watching everybody whisper, and you're going, what are they whispering about? And at the age I was at, I just assumed it was me. So that's not that always, when there's secrets, I hate that. Why didn't you tell me that? And then I discussed it with Ray for a while about even my mother, who said she didn't tell me how my father died because she wanted to protect me. She didn't want me to be hurt by that. And that was very noble of her. But as I grew into an adulthood, it kind of turned into almost a phobia about secrets. And I learned about my father's funeral when I was 57 years old, because I didn't go. The wake was right around the corner, and I didn't go to the funeral. I didn't go to the wake because they didn't want me to see my dad dead. They were trying to protect me, and in that sense, it was good. But in another sense, you grow up with that. If you're not told the truth soon enough, it can become problematic. And in my research, I looked at little kids, or if I thought I was going to be a principal of a high school or a grade school after my doctorate was done, and that didn't happen, which is fine. But I learned about little kids, and the research shows, or what I read, was that you should tell them as much as you can, given their developmental level. And that's more reassuring. So I think all these things have accumulated with me over my life, over the course of my life, and I don't want to carry them anymore. So that's why I'm doing this work as well, because the load gets really heavy. I went to a weekend for men. It was called Path to Spirit. And the encampment was blocks from the parking spot, and they left these giant rocks on the side of the road on purpose, or the path, I should say. So I'm walking to the encampment, and someone said, pick up rocks. And so I picked up the biggest rocks I could find and put them in my backpack. I could barely walk because those rocks were metaphors for what I was carrying. And then at the end of the weekend, you put your rocks down and you're not carrying it anymore. But again, that was just the beginning of my healing, or part of the healing process I've been going through, the learning process, whatever you want to call it. So that was that. I don't want to get into way too many stories. It's just that one thing really relates to the other, like hypervigilance. Hypervigilance goes hand in hand with triggers. And when I used to go out with my friends, I would get so nervous. So if we were going out on Friday, that was a trigger for me starting on Monday. And I've always felt like I had to perform for the group I was with. And if I didn't, I didn't know, I wouldn't be accepted. They wouldn't love me if I wasn't the comedian, if I wasn't the star of the show. And I'm not even sure what the star of the show means. But I would have to drink just to go out to drink because I was so nervous. And one of the things I thought about after much discussion is how do you get rid of them? And one of them is to withdraw yourself from that, or take yourself out of that situation. So I don't do that anymore. And the trigger went away. And I also refer to triggers as having that you're in a giant file cabinet of life. And I referred to this, I think, in the first podcast. It's filed under T, triggers, and I don't know what they are. I could give you a list of 100. I don't know if they could just come. And I have to recognize them, and then I have to think about what is happening here. Why am I so nervous? Every holiday in my dysfunctional family, weeks before Christmas, I would be in knots. And sure enough, then nobody let me down. it would be dysfunctional as ever. We had some alcohol abuse in my family, and one of the family members would come loaded, and my mom would wait on him hand and foot. And I'm going, why are you doing this? Why are, he's going to go out to the store. We need to get some stovetop stuffing. And he would come back 3 hours later, wasted, and say they were out of stovetop stuffing. And I'm watching my mom cater to this guy going, what are you doing? And I know the psychological term for it is enabling, and that's what she was doing. But when you're trying to be Mike the All-Star and you're not measuring up to a drunk guy, that gets very, very confusing. So holidays were a trigger for me. Every holiday. And it's too bad, because the more I learn about this, the more it doesn't have to be that way. Yet people choose to live in misery. They're addicted to the chaos that a trigger might bring. And I had a friend of mine tell me that we were at 60, and she goes, I checked the last box. I'm not doing this anymore. And that resonated with me, that we're getting older. I'm getting older, and I don't want to do this anymore. So that's another reason, number 362, for doing this work. I wrote something. I just want the rest of my life to be peaceful. I don't want to fight anymore. I don't have to worry. I mean, you're going to worry, but not have to worry anymore. And part of it is living in the moment. And the other thing Ray discussed the other day was that breathing thing. I breathe like that all the time. And when I watched the last podcast, I brought that up on purpose, because breathing really helped me. And it was very non-invasive. It wasn't like you have to practice breathing. I mean, you don't have to go to a camp, like breathing camp. You just do it. And it's one of the things I really, really enjoy. And my daughter yelled at me one time, why are you breathing like that? And it was because we were at my mom's house for a holiday, and I had to let that bad energy out of me. So, and the other thing I wanted to talk about before we get into what we did, triggers was what I wanted to talk about. But when I started writing my dissertation, prior to that, Ray asked me the difference between grieving and mourning. And I'm not sure, as I started writing my family story, I'm not sure I ever grieved my dad. But what I did start to grieve was my family, and how we all had to live our lives post-suicide. And this doesn't have to be suicide. It could be any type of trauma. How we were the ones that paid the piper for that one. I watched my sisters. My sister told me she couldn't read at all because my dad was beating her up a lot. So she was traumatized in school and was a very poor student. And she said the day he died, she went back to school soon after. She read like a champion. And it's these things you learn, and that was part of it. I think I grieved that when I watched how my older sister became my mother, because my mother told me that she couldn't be a mom, so she handed all the kids off to Roseanne, and Roseanne was 14. So I watched her grow up as a mom way before her time, and now into adulthood. I won't say dysfunction, but we all are hurting from this certain situation. And I wrote many times, when someone commits suicide, their pain is over, but yours is just starting, or continues to manifest itself. And I didn't want to do that anymore. So I guess we could say I mourned my dad, because we would go to the cemetery and look at the ground. And occasionally, when I felt like I needed a dad, I didn't have one. So I might have mourned his loss, and also made me very angry. because I swore at him and said, "You left me on my own. I'm flying by the seat of my pants here. It's because of you." But that wasn't necessarily true. That might have just been a moment in time. I have all these notes here. It always makes me laugh. I always lose my place, and I'll remember what to say next week. The one thing I wanted to talk about with triggers that I thought was important, though, there's two types. There's internal and external. And obviously the internal triggers come from within. They are anger, anxiety, feeling overwhelmed, pain, and sadness. I have all of those. And again, I didn't know why. I had no idea. One time when I was in high school, this would be a trigger, and maybe the last story. I was like a bad guy, but I wasn't a bad guy. I just talked too much. I did think I had ants in my pants like crazy. So the dean of students was going to kick me out of school. And before he kicked me out, he called my mom. And before he called my mom, he said, "Your father would be rolling over in his grave if he knew what you were doing." And that was a low blow, because he knew my father had killed himself. And to say that is ridiculous. And even my mom cried and was on my side when that happened, when he said that. Why would someone do that? I still don't know to this day. I don't know where he is to this day, but he didn't do a very good job. And I did address external triggers, and how the Moby Dick example. The odd thing was, we were at a party one time, and the party was at the apartment I grew up in. So I go in there, and the last time I had been there was 100 years ago, and now my friend Jim lived there with his wife, and I'm walking through this apartment, and it was like I was in a daze. I couldn't remember anything that happened. That might be disassociation, which is how this all ties in. I couldn't remember anything from growing up there. I didn't remember. He showed me where the bedrooms were, but I wouldn't have known. And it was so odd to me to go back there. And ironically enough, Ray lives right around the corner from where that happened. And the basement apartment's still there. They knocked the garage down. But the scene of the crime it's gone, at least physically. Ray asked me to do some homework, and the homework was short-term energy relieving behaviors. The acronym is STEP.
STEBS, STEBS. STEBS.
Yeah, what are you going to do? Anyway, after I got divorced, I ran 4 marathons because I had to do something to let go of the guilt. I never thought I'd get divorced. I did not get married to get divorced, and it just didn't work out. So I thought running a marathon would be a really good thing to do. So I ran it, but the saboteur in me smoked the whole time. I'd work out, I'd run 10 miles and have 3 cigarettes. The second time I ran a marathon, I was jonesing for a cigarette like halfway through. We ran by a Starbucks, and all I wanted to do was have a cup of coffee and a cigarette. And so I did when I was done. That's been pretty typical behavior for me for a real long time. When good things happen to me, I have to question why. And depending on where I'm at in my head, I'll ruin it. I had a painting business with 7 guys. I ran it into the ground. Part of it was I was ignorant on how to run a business with 7 guys. The other thing was I couldn't be making that much money. I couldn't go on vacations and not worry about it. I couldn't have that, so I wrecked it. And so that's that. The more I do this, the more I like doing this. I can't say thank you enough for everybody involved. I was going to start talking about grief, but I'm going to hang on till next time. I just really think that if you watch 1, 2, 3, and 4, everything ties in, everything piggybacks on this whole trauma. It's like one domino. Okay, my dad did this, knock over the first domino, and the next thing, 19 fall. And if you really want to do your homework on that, there's another 44, and then there's another 50. And a friend of me best described us is that we're all works in progress, and that this is not an overnight, don't ever think it's an overnight cure, because it's not. And with that, I'll pass it on to Ray.
Thank you, Mike. The next part of the podcast, I'm going to show 2 areas where you can help manage that grief. It works for me. It works for when I'm sick. It works for when I'm having a down day. The first one is called EFT, Emotional Freedom Techniques, often referred to as tapping. And basically it's information and healing based on Tibetan medicine, which clears the energy meridians in the body. There'll be a sheet that comes up on the screen right now. I was taught by Hindu teachers, so I will work through their system. So tapping has a bunch of areas. In the tapping itself, probably the most important part of the tapping is to find the affirmation that fits you the best, and you repeat that affirmation 3 times as you're tapping on the different meridians. Mine, the one I like to use is, even though I have this stage 4 kidney issue, I deeply respect and love myself. So if you say that each time, you're doing it. Now, to start the tapping properly, EFT, you should start on your head, tapping in the middle of your head. I don't, because again, being taught by Hindu people and Hindu teachers, that's the crown chakra, and you never put anything above that or touch a little child on the head. You let the energy go through the crown chakra. Then you would start with the third eye, and you would tap, and you would repeat that mantra 3 times. Then you would come inside to where the eyebrow starts. I'll just do one side. Here, you say it 3 times. Work to the outside of the eye, below the eye. And again, these are all energy meridians that are stuck underneath the nose, the chin, just below the collarbone. And this one's really interesting. If you look at some of the Qigong healing stuff, there's some really powerful acupressure points right there. So you go there, then underneath, about 2 inches below the armpits, and I'm going through this pretty quick, but all this does is activates the amygdala, the part of the brain, very important part of the brain. Then you'll go to the fingers. You'll start with the thumb. Make sure you do it 3 times. Index finger, middle finger, and then you skip the ring finger. Whether you do it on both hands, either one, you skip the ring finger because that's a whole different meridian. Then the little finger. And the last thing you do is go to what they call the gamut point. And the gamut point is that spot between the 4th and 5th knuckle. You go down, there's like a little V in there. You just tap that, keep mentioning your affirmation, but by tapping that activates the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is an incredibly important part of the body for healing. So when you can tap into that vagus nerve here, through singing, gargling, humming, whatever you can, as soon as you activate that vagus nerve, you will feel better. So that is tapping in a 2-minute nutshell, whereas there are some really good people online that can teach it and show you how to do it properly and thoroughly. I sort of rushed through it. The second thing that I found that helps a lot of people is aromatherapy. Now, I've been trained by 2 great aromatherapists. One lady has moved down to Texas, and the other lady is available for us at any time. But the aromatherapy, the 2 essential oils which affect the brain, which help manage, are frankincense and lavender. Now, you got to be careful with the oils because lavender has a rebound effect where you don't want to do lavender all the time. But frankincense, it's mentioned in many old ancient scriptures. It's a very powerful oil, a great healing oil. And very simply, what you do is you take one of the wicks, it's a cotton wick, you place it in a little inhaler. Then, as I was taught, each drop of the oil represents about a month. So I try to put 12 drops in. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay? And then I'll put the top on and make sure you tap it so it's tight, so nothing comes out. And I just made a personal inhaler. Shake it a little bit, maybe 5, 6 times. And then to use it properly, we'll go back to what we were talking about last week with that alternate nasal breathing, nostril breathing, where pinch the left nostril, hold it here, and it's yours. So if you want to put it up a little higher, that's fine. Breathe in deep for 5 seconds. Hold it for 7. Breathe out for 7 or 8. And then after you're done breathing out on the opposite nostril, breathe in again. In deep for 5 seconds. Hold it 7. And let it go for 8. So you get the concept. So I will pass this to one of our hosts today. So that's frankincense, very expensive oil. There's some good oil companies out there. One of the biggest ones are not good because in my experience with them, they don't like to support veterans or Native American events. And that's a big part of what we do. So I would strongly encourage not to use them. There's other places that are really good and really solid. The second one is lavender. Lavender is a really good healer for you. So it's the same thing. We take the wick and we take it with sort of a tweezers because we don't want any of the oils from our human hands on the wick. Put it in there. Do our 10 to 12 drops. And then you can replace that every year or every 9 months. But I would strongly suggest that you do this in the morning when you wake up. Find a minute or so in the afternoon. And then clear the mind before you go to bed. And do it at night. And it doesn't take much time at all. So again, we'll pop it tight. And you can hear that. Shake it. And do the same thing. I will not undo it, but basically alternate nostril breathing. 5, 7, 7 or 8. And do that 3 times each in the morning, and I'll give that one to our host. So that's a couple of ways you can manage it. You have to stay on it, though. And as Mike said earlier, this is just a small part of the hard work you got to do to maintain a sense of normalcy when you're battling that grief, when you're battling those triggers and the trauma, because it pops up. And as we all know, many times in life, it just pops up at the worst time possible. So we want to make sure we can manage that. And before I hand it over to Mike to finish up, I would like to thank Chase Heidner and Ben Juno, our technicians who have worked us through this the first 4 weeks. We're going to take some time off and do some real specific soul searching on topics that we want. Plus, they're getting married, so we're giving them time. They gave us their time. And then when they're ready, after their honeymoon, we'll return with some more podcasts that hopefully will help people. So, back to Mike.
I just wanted to recap what I talked about. And I had a thought. So many times I hear mental health equated with mental illness. And they're independent of one another, in my opinion. Because just as I was walking around the block 20 times having 10 cigarettes the first time I went to a therapist, I wasn't nuts. I was trying to get mentally healthy, but I wasn't mentally ill. And so I wanted to clarify that. And the other thing I wanted to close with, there are no accidents. I have a book on grief here. And the first page I opened up to was unresolved grief. And grief is not, it's yours. The triggers are yours. I just gave you examples of mine, and I probably have 80 more that I couldn't think of right now. But I just wanted to finish that unresolved grief is everywhere. And thousands of mental health professionals we work with have found that although their clients come to them with some other presenting issues, all of them have unresolved grief as their base. I'm a firm believer in that. And I think it's words to live by. And grief, again, doesn't have to be suicide. It can be you fell down and broke your leg and missed senior year of baseball.
Or it could be grief of ending your career. You've been a teacher or you've been a food industry person. You own your own business after 40 years. Your career is over. Now what do you do? Whereas your career was every part of your fiber of what you did. So the grief could be the loss of a pet, parent, job, status, you name it. Grief can crawl up anywhere.
Because I don't want to get locked into this. I know we're not sending that message, but I don't want to get locked into this is all about suicide, because it's not. My examples come from that. That doesn't mean that yours will. So with that, we'll sign off.
And thank you again, and we'll be back within a month. Enjoy your day.